Hello, friends. Well, of course, the big question is, what would happen if Bernie Sanders were the nominee? And what would happen if he was president? Could he really get any of this stuff through Congress? Well, those are great questions. And in my opinion, there's only two ways that this could really play out. Number one, if he's the nominee, I think he loses. Because right now, his message of economic revolution, it's only really worked when there was a Republican in the White House and a recession. So FDR was able to use that against Hoover during the Great Depression. Barack Obama was able to use that against George W. Bush during the last Great Recession. But right now there's a Democrat in the White House. And as we've seen over and over again, for about the last 100 years, the parties, they like to go back and forth. People like that balance. I mean, only one time there have been two successive presidents from the same party where the first one didn't die or resign, and that's Reagan Bush, okay? So it's not really in the Democrats' favor right now, historically. So for Bernie to be the nominee and promise an economic revolution, either the economy between now and November tanks and gets worse, in which case people will probably say, that's the Democrats' fault, that's liberals' fault, that's Obama's fault, that's liberal policy's fault, and run to Trump or whoever the nominee is. Or the economy stays pretty good, or maybe even gets a little bit better, in which case a lot of moderates and independents, they may be looking at his proposals and say, but why do we really need this economic revolution? It seems like Obama's policies are working, not ones that are farther left than that. I think either way he loses, but let's say he's the nominee and Trump's the nominee on the Republican side. I think he's the exact worst candidate to face Trump. Yeah, all Trump's got to do is show up, and we've already heard him say basically this, and say, I'm a billionaire, I'm worth $10 billion, I've created thousands of jobs, I know economics, Bernie's a socialist, he's never created a job, he's drawn a government check for 30 years. And we might know that that's wrong, but I think the average voter, they're going to hear that message and they're going to think, wow, that's right, and they're going to turn to that. Bernie's going to be trying to sell them the idea that they can have 10, 15% better Social Security benefits, and Trump's going to sell them a fantasy that he can make them rich. It's not hard to figure out who they would pick. But even if by some miracle Bernie was the president, what would happen? And I think, in a way, that may be a little bit more dangerous, because historically, the only time in the last 100 years that we've had a remotely mediocre Democratic president, it was Jimmy Carter. They gave us 12 years of George H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan. As I said, the only time that you've had back-to-back presidents in the same party without one dying or resigning. So people sometimes forget that American politics is not an action but a reaction, and people typically vote against the guy that people typically blame bad times on whoever the president is and punish that party for it. Bernie says he can get free college, free health care, expanded Social Security benefits, infrastructure spending, I mean, $15 an hour federal minimum wage, all this stuff through Congress, even though right now Republicans control the House, they control the Senate, and they control the Supreme Court. And the big problem is that even if they didn't, Bernie's not popular in his own party. And that seems to be what his fans like about him, except for when they realize that that matters. Right now, he has only 2 congressional endorsements. Hillary has 100 state, House Representatives people backing her, and every senator that's endorsed has endorsed Hillary, not Bernie. Even the governor of Vermont hasn't endorsed Bernie, which tells you something about how popular he is in his own party. He's spreading the fantasy that he's more ideologically pure than Obama, and Obama's a sellout and all this stuff. That assumes that Obama didn't want to do exactly what he's promising. Obama did. They originally put the single-payer option on the table for Obamacare. They originally put the public option on the table for Obamacare, and they couldn't even get the votes when Democrats controlled both houses of Congress, as they did in Obama's first 2 years. So I think what he's selling is kind of a fantasy in many ways, not just the fact that he can't really get it through Congress, and not just the fact that he doesn't really have a solid way to pay for this, but also the fact that Obama didn't want to do the same thing, or that these ideas are even really Bernie's. Right now, when Bernie promises free in-state tuition for college kids, some states already have that. Georgia has the educational lottery that guarantees their high school students who have at least a B average or higher, they can go have free in-state tuition for a few years. So some of these programs he's proposing, they're not new. They're just expanses of some of the things from the 1930s and some things that states have already been doing. And in fact, with the free health care that he's talking about, the single-payer system, his own state of Vermont looked into that. They were going to be the first state in America to pass that, and the governor didn't want to do it because they couldn't find a way to keep the costs down. He figured out that, like what everybody knows, which is that foreign countries, they have to have price caps, and things like that to keep the costs down. And Bernie won't advocate for that. So if you have doctors without a salary cap, you don't have a set number of x-rays you can do, you don't have price caps on the medications, you don't want to really put controls on how much the medications can be, all these things mean that you're going to have an astronomical system without any real price controls, which he won't even advocate for. So I don't only think his proposals can't get through Congress, I don't even think he believes in them. Or he would be saying some of these things that would have to come with them. He would be selling that to people. So my fear is that you'd have an impotent one-term president and then 16 years of the Ted Cruz revolution, because as I said, people are constantly reacting to politics. Over the last 100 years, Democrats have been amazing presidents. Woodrow Wilson, FDR, JFK, LBJ, Harry Truman, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. I mean, it's like the Avengers of presidents, but people still elect Republicans. On the Republican side, you've had dog shit, basically. We're talking about Warren G. Harding, we're talking Hoover, we're talking Nixon, we're talking Ford, we're talking both of the Bushes. The only remotely good presidents they've had are Eisenhower, and some would say Reagan. That's why they talk about Reagan every 5 minutes. People judge Democrats more harshly than they do Republicans. And I think that's a real problem for Bernie. If he were president, and again, I don't really see a real path for him to be that way. I think Hillary's a much stronger nominee against Trump because, as I've said before, she does well with older women voters who don't like Trump, and that's actually a big voting bloc. And I'm a little afraid of this if it's Bernie versus Trump, because I don't want America to be huge in the next 4 years.